Currently, we have over 6.5 billion people on this planet. Only a small percentage of them, however, have a standard of living which we would consider even tolerable. To maintain the kind of modern quality of life seen in parts of the so-called developed world would require, among other things, a massive increase of electricity. In the United States, we have on average 3 kilowatts of power available per capita. Other industrial nations, such as Germany and Japan, average from 1.5 to 2 kilowatts available per capita. In India and China, they range from 0.1 to 0.3 kilowatts available, and in some parts of Africa, it gets even worse. Any modern society needs to have a minimal 3 to 5 kilowatts of power available per capita, with an orientation towards increasing that available power. Globally, that's 20 to 33 billion kilowatts of power necessary simply to adequately maintain the population we currently have. What about in 50 or 100 years, when we could have 50 billion people or more? If we as a civilization are to survive to see the next 50 years and build our way out of this economic breakdown crisis, which threatens to bring our population down to 1 to 2 billion people through mass epidemic or starvation, we are going to have to seriously rethink the way we view our own relationship to the universe and come up with some drastic changes in our energy policy. The question now is, what is the next state of power the human species must move towards? What will the future energy source be?
Mr. Speaker, this important legislation is an explicit recognition that our great nation must invest today in the development of clean, renewable energy
and instead use biofuel. Now biofuel is only half of the emissions of greenhouse gases, or hydrogen. No emissions.
I challenge our nation to commit to producing 100% of our electricity from renewable energy and truly clean, carbon-free sources within 10 years.
And to use the funds for research into renewable energy resources and incentives.
The belief that so-called soft energy systems or free energy systems can actually power the future of the United States of America, or much less the world, is only that, a belief. Reality simply and clearly does not substantiate that belief. And yet, that belief permeates leading policymaking circles, claiming to hold the banner of science, though upon inspection, it is being carried forward only by its dogmatic followers, not its own scientific merits. Whether the believers know it or not, their fanatical adherence to such green dogmas will lead to a massive collapse of world population on the order of billions. To start off with, what is claimed as free energy is by no means free. In fact, the choice of the term free by some of its proponents is itself evidence that they are not qualified to give any advice in scientific or economic matters. Claiming that wind or solar power are free energies simply because we may seem to have free access to the fuel source, the wind or the solar radiation, etc., is missing a number of fundamental considerations. Perhaps the most obvious of which is that we still have to build the solar panels and the windmills, and lots of them, for very little in return. Take a look at a standard General Electric 1.5 megawatt windmill. The area swept out by the spinning blades is large enough to circumscribe a Boeing 747 jumbo jet, or even Al Gore. The tower's height alone can range from 60 to 100 meters, That's up to the length of a football field in height. And just this tower alone uses from 200 to 400 tons of steel. For a rating of 1.5 megawatts, this is a massive machine. But 1.5 megawatts is the peak power generation. That is only at optimal wind speeds. However, wind speeds clearly vary, when there's any wind at all. Despite attempts to cover up this fact, in reality, the averaged power production for these windmills is about a quarter of their peak rating. In this case, slightly more than a third of a megawatt. Rather than believing that this is free energy, look at the full production process of that massive windmill, and then ask, how efficient is this? Comparing the physical cost of production to society against the gain to society. For that windmill to be produced, hundreds and hundreds of tons of iron and other ores have to be mined, transported, processed, transported again, and assembled. Advanced ball bearings, brakes, gears, and other components have to be machined. The electrical components have to be designed and built. All for what amounts to, frankly, not much energy produced. In addition, the irregular nature of wind makes the consistency of power unreliable. Very unreliable. There always needs to be a backup energy source available. Claiming that this is the way to power the future is an absurd proposal. Now compare this with some of the frontier nuclear technologies. Take a small 285 megawatt, fourth generation high temperature gas cooled reactor, like this one, designed by General Atomics. It would require nearly 800 of these windmills to generate the same amount of power as this single small nuclear reactor. The arrangement of an array of windmills requires spacing between them, so each won't interfere with its neighbor's wind. So now, using General Electric's specifications, each 1.5 megawatt windmill requires 88,935 square meters of land, 22 acres. Multiply this by our 800 windmills, and you see that the land area required for these windmills to equal the power output of this single small nuclear plant is 17,600 acres. That's 27.5 square miles, over half the size of the city of San Francisco. This 285 megawatts of power would only provide roughly 1/3 of the city's average power usage. So to power the city of San Francisco, it would require 1.5 times the total land area of that city, plus a full-scale backup energy source capable of powering the entire city for the times when the wind just ain't blowing. The 3 units of fourth-generation high-temperature gas-cooled nuclear reactors would fit within a few blocks of the city, and they would provide an uninterrupted flow of energy. This comparison is only initially useful to get people thinking in the proper direction. But for those literate in matters of science and economics, those who are not just believers, there is an even more important aspect: changes in the quality of power as opposed to the mere quantity. We will come to an elaboration of this subsuming point shortly. To get there, let's take the case of solar power. Now, in the attempt to harness solar radiation as an energy source, we again see a highly inefficient process. Take the recently constructed and hyped up Nevada Solar One power plant. This plant is rated at 64 megawatts, but that is the power generated at high noon on a clear day. When the less solar-intense periods are averaged in, the actual average generating capacity is about 15 megawatts, less than a fourth of the peak rating. This plant covers an area of 400 acres, well over half a square mile. Comparing this with our earlier example of powering the city of San Francisco, it would take 57 such Nevada Solar One plants to generate the same amount of energy as the 2,400 windmills or the 3 small nuclear reactors. 57 of these plants would cover 22,800 acres, or 35.6 square miles. That's 3/4 of the entire city of San Francisco. The production of 35 square miles of these solar plants would be an enormous physical cost to society. And again, these systems constantly need backup power to operate. And in this case, a completely different power system is needed to provide power for at least half the time. That is, at night, every night, all night. But let us now look into the science behind why these proposals are completely bunk. The fundamental problem with solar as a source of power is that there is a fixed amount of sunlight that actually reaches the surface of the Earth. This can be measured as the number of watts the surface receives in a square meter. In the United States, on a yearly average, we receive about 200 watts per square meter. It may go up to about 240 in some of our desert regions, perhaps.
Now, the essential problem with solar energy, with any form of solar energy, is that the energy flux of the sun is limited. And what it comes down to on the average for the United States is 200 watts per square meter. So 200 watts, just think of 2 100-watt light bulbs. That's the amount of electricity you would be getting out of a square meter, something, about 10 square feet, if you could capture all of the sun's rays. But what's the problem with that? You can't increase that. First of all, that's the limit of solar energy. No amount of concentrating and parabolic reflectors and all these things don't increase that energy flux. That's all that's there.
So, relative to other power sources available, solar radiation itself is an inherently lower order power source. And on top of that, our best feasible technologies can only utilize roughly 5 to 15% of the solar radiation. While 30% efficiency has been achieved in laboratories, these are at extremely high costs, making them not commercially feasible. But 5 or 15% or hell, even 30% efficiency, through whatever advanced technology is applied, the bottom line is that you are still bounded by a lower order energy source from the very beginning. So instead of masturbating with photovoltaic cells or parabolic reflectors or other little gadgets, let's take our investigation from the top and look at the inherent boundaries of different energy sources by comparing the energy densities of various fuels. The energy available from the fissioning of less than 2 grams of uranium is equal to the energy available from the burning of either 1,260 gallons of oil, 12,300 pounds of coal, or 23.5 tons of dry wood. Again, that is compared to less than 2 grams of uranium. So when comparing the fuel sources by weight, the fissioning of uranium is 3 million times more powerful than burning coal, and 2.2 million times more powerful than burning petroleum. This simple comparison points to a hierarchy among these power sources. Looking at the varying densities of power is illustrative of this, but it is still a quantitative comparison, comparing the different power sources by the change in quantitative amount of energy per weight. The real question remains: what underlies this? What governs this effect we measure as a quantitative change? In order to understand this, let's take our cue from the ingenious work of the lowly little chlorophyll, nature's powerhouse. With the use of solar radiation to generate electrical power, we see a very inefficient process which relies on turning a fixed amount of low-density solar radiation into heat and electrical current. Rather than simply relying on the fixed abiotic energy coming from the sun, The chlorophyll molecule converts solar radiation into the energy and the byproducts necessary to both sustain and develop the higher order processes of the biosphere, or life. The plant takes in carbon dioxide from the air, water and other nutrients from its roots, and uses solar radiation to turn these products into food, or sugars for the plant to eat, and oxygen for our biosphere to grow. However, nobody actually knows exactly what occurs during the process of photosynthesis. The process is actually much more complex than a mere series of chemical reactions, despite popularly accepted academic opinion. Through photosynthesis, plants convert carbon dioxide and water into sugars and other products. Although these same sugars can be synthesized in a laboratory, it takes much more energy and resources. Using the chlorophyll in its leaves, the plant can do it more efficiently. That's why we still derive our sugars from plants, not from chemical plants. We may not know how the plant can so efficiently convert these inorganic substances into the basic products necessary for all life. What we do know is the effect of this process produces a qualitative rather than mere quantitative upshift. Now, we are no longer simply measuring kilowatts of power as such, but instead are looking at the transformative power of chlorophyll itself. By utilizing chlorophyll, the plant uses the solar radiation far more effectively than a photovoltaic panel or a solar concentrator plant. Rather than a linear abiotic process, the plant increases the transformative power of the biosphere, producing oxygen, food, and other byproducts that are essential to life on Earth. Now that is an effective use of solar power. Contrary to the beliefs of many, especially those who identify themselves with the so-called green or environmentalist movement, the very nature of the universe is characterized by exactly this type of qualitative development process, governed by a hierarchy of distinct universal physical principles. The biosphere itself, expressing a distinct universal physical principle of a higher transformative power than abiotic processes, has been increasing its power in the universe and playing a more and more dominant role in constantly changing the Earth. The idea of some equilibrium state or sustainability is foreign and contrary to the universe itself. Rather, we exist as an integral part of a universe where the fundamental overarching directionality is a process of development, not in simple quantitative increases, but in successive nonlinear shifts to higher states of organization, what may be best described as an anti-entropic process. The development of the solar system expresses this, the development of life on the planet expresses this, and the very creative nature of human beings and healthy human societies express this. So rather than building forests of solar panels, or worse, burning these amazing plants for fuel, which will actually increase the surface temperature of the planet, let's use irrigation to green the deserts and create a better quality of life for the people on this planet. It is from this basis that we must determine the economic policies we need. Nuclear fission power represents a qualitative upshift in society, and its immediate implementation as the dominant power source globally is a must. We have a water crisis. Instead of being completely dependent upon the more limited supplies of fresh water from rivers, from lakes, and rain, high-temperature nuclear reactors can make the large-scale desalination of ocean water possible, through energy-intensive processes such as reverse osmosis and flash distillation. With the higher temperatures of the new fourth-generation gas-cooled nuclear reactors, it becomes possible to efficiently produce hydrogen and hydrogen-based fuels, which can replace the burning of petroleum products for fuel. The hydrogen can be produced from water through either electrolysis or thermochemical splitting. This changes the resource base of our economy, freeing up petroleum for the production of plastics and other petrochemical products, and increasing the transformative power of human society. This increase in transformative power is invisible to anybody measuring in calories or joules. To get an indication of this, we must use the metric of energy flux density of our power source, measuring the concentration and density of power per cross-sectional unit of area. Nuclear power is the beginning of mankind's mastery of an entire range of subatomic processes and associated technologies. Not only do we have access to the energy and power from the splitting and fusing of atoms, and that's a hell of a lot of energy, but whole new fields of science have opened up in man's brief exploration of the subatomic domain. For example, new isotopes have been developed which can help track and cure diseases in biological processes, produce new, better quality materials, and break any ore or waste product down to its constituent elements through the fusion torch. It is this process of mankind acting on newly discovered principles and technologies which characterizes man's increased power over the universe, and is also associated with a new resource base, ensuring that we do not remain dependent on previous finite supplies of resources. With the integration of large-scale modern infrastructure, such as magnetically levitated rail, water transportation and irrigation systems, bridges, etc., we can support the world and will be well on our way to giving 6 billion people and beyond a high industrial living standard. Any other attempts to implement so-called free or green energy sources, such as solar, wind, geothermal, wave, tidal, biofuels, or anything else so-called sustainable, will accelerate our current economic breakdown crisis and necessarily lead to the collapse of the population to 1 to 2 billion people, wiping out entire societies and cultures, which is, of course, the expressed intention of Al Gore, Prince Philip, and their associated degenerates. The choice is ours to make now, but future generations remain, or not, to face the consequences.